Okay, welcome back everyone. So we're now moving into the lightning talks. We've got 8 speakers coming up. They're each going to talk for 5 minutes and they're going to come up onto the stage in turn and introduce themselves as part of the talk. So I'm not going to introduce you, sorry. As before, we're not going to have time for questions again. But after the lightning talks, we're going into another break, so there's lots of time there for you to talk to speakers. So, handing over to Lauren for our first lightning talk.
Hi. Thank you very much, Jo. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name's Lauren Gardiner. I'm the curator of the Cambridge University Herbarium, which is part of the Department of Plant Sciences. I have a long title and a short title. Botanical, Filth and Degradation. I promise that's not just a silly name to get your attention. My big problem right at the moment is I have an enormous collection. Part of the university, part of this Department of Plant Sciences, we haven't really been using it for decades, if not hundreds of years. And I have a major conservation issue, which really this is a plea for help, advice. Materials conservation is not my background. I'm a scientist by training, and I use these specimens, and so my interaction with herbarium specimens is very different from perhaps some of your interactions with this kind of material. For those of you who don't know what a herbarium is, and I do not expect that many people do know what a herbarium is, essentially it's a biodiversity repository for plants. So the collections that the Zoology Museum has, or the entomological collections, etc., this is the botanical equivalent. It's an enormous collection, particularly this collection, of dried, pressed plants mounted on sheets of paper. Varying degrees of archival quality, materials, varying degrees of initial preservation, storage, pest control, etc. This is a shot inside part of our vault. It's an underground vault. Within the Sainsbury laboratory, and on this side we've got compactors all the way down there, and then there's compactors all down this side as well, and it's about 1.1 million specimens. A lot of our specimens are historically really important. I can tell you lots more about why these specimens are important, but we're particularly rich in 19th century specimens. So here we've got some specimens in a particular collection, the Lindley Herbarium. 58,000 specimens in this collection alone, and a huge number of these are type specimens. They're the specimens that names of plants are fixed to in perpetuity. So these are like the absolute gold dust specimens. We also have 1,000 Darwin specimens, which are the collections which most people know about in this collection if they know anything about it at all. They're really important, but actually the type specimens are even more important in many ways. So here we have a piece of plant material, dried pressed plant, attached to a sheet of paper. I was collected in 1841, and that is the specimen that the name Echeveria acutifolia, a particular succulent plant, is attached to forever. There's also artwork on quite a few of these specimens. That's a hand-coloured plate, but that is an original watercolour illustration. And pencil lines, etc. in there, which the plate for the publication was produced from later on. These are also 2 really important specimens for other reasons, but a lot of the material in this collection is in a horrible state. So this is a collection of about 58,000 specimens. It's within a larger collection of world specimens, particularly rich in this 19th century period, which has been stored in pretty horrible conditions at various points. A lot of it was stored in London, lots of smog, lots of gas lighting. They're absolutely covered in acidic soot and grime, and also mercuric chloride, methyl bromide, DDT, and all the rest. Very good at keeping pests away from your collections. This specimen, I've actually taken off who in this room said this about my collection, but they did describe it as quite simply the filthiest specimen of the collection they've ever seen. I've seen worse in other people's collections. And that this has the original field notes plus various labels which actually show that this is an incredibly important specimen, and it is falling apart. The paper that's on is so acidic, it's cracking, and in some cases, some of these specimens are holding the paper together. Help me, please. It's a huge scale of a problem. There may be 100,000 specimens which are in this state of lack of conservation. I don't have much money, I don't have any time, I have no staff, so I need a pragmatic solution for how I can conserve these specimens. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello, I'm Deborah. I am the UCM Regional Conservation Officer, which means I go out and about and stick my nose in other people's business. I do a lot of collaborative working, which is what today is about. And one of the collaborations we have is between UCM and the Cambridge County Council. In most counties, archaeological archive material, which Jenny talked a little bit about earlier. Thank you, Jenny, because that's saved me an explanation. Most archaeological archive material, which is the paperwork, the digital files, the bulk archaeology, the metalwork, the small finds, are the physical object part of that goes to a county museum. We don't have one. So in Cambridgeshire, that goes to Cambridgeshire County Council, and they have an historic environment team, which includes the data processing part, so the actual logging of where there's been digs, where there's discoveries. It also includes the planning archaeologists, and in Cambridgeshire also the Portable Antiquities Scheme Finds Liaison Officer. So it's a department, which is a fantastic thing to have together because often they're spread about in different organisations. So I've worked with them over a number of years, helping with the care of the physical archive. And that will be lumps of stuff. It's not just paper when we use the term archaeological archive. So what I'm after today is somebody to talk to about salt monitoring. And this is why. So Jenny has already eloquently stated archaeology is destructive. Therefore, the record keeping is vital. Part of that record is called a representative archive. And that's the stuff that's kept. You don't dig up a site and keep everything because it would be completely impossible. What you keep is a representative set. And pardon me for reading, otherwise I'll go over time. So, until about 7 years ago, we kept our Cambridge excavation material in a listed building in Landbeach, and it was a barn. So not perfect. In the same way we normally do, save a building, put a collection in it, stuff the collection. Now, to get at it, it meant a car journey out to Landbeach, which, for those that don't know, 7 or 8 miles, no buses. Anyone that knows the county council knows you can't park there. So the staff never have their cars at work. To get to Landbeach to go and find anything, you have to have a car. Nothing was indexed digitally, it was just done by the labels on the boxes. So if you wanted something from a particular site, it's reliant on staff knowledge of that. Came in about 5 years ago, it's probably in bay number roughly that. So to find anything could take a really long time. And this stuff is required by researchers. The barn was full. We had 5,000 or 6,000 longbone boxes, which are that kind of the length of long bones really, plus other boxes. There was at least the same material within archaeological units, and there was more in process being boxed and ready to be deposited. And then we found out A14 developments, we found out about North Stowe. All of these things have compulsory archaeology, and they all generate a lot of material. So we had to do something just because we didn't have space. We had to do something because the cost of the barn was expensive. It wasn't an ideal solution. It had rats in, etc. Fire prevention was really bad. It's a wooden barn, full of cardboard. Great. And so a large project was commissioned to sort out what to do. And there were lots of things going on. So what we ended up with was deep store, which is a salt mine in Cheshire. So dig a big hole, put everything in it. The hole's already there. They're very good at looking after the hole. We examined by agents of decay, and we looked at fire, flood, light, pests, all of those. It's brilliant. Their job is to stay alive down there, so they're excellent at all of the safety precautions, fire and flood. There's no light down in that hole. And the environment is very stable. Add to that, we're in a BS 5454 compliant vault. There's lots of other information I could give you about it, but the point of me coming today is it's a salt mine. We have good pressure in the vaults, which keeps the... Okay. I need someone to talk about salt with. Go on, press ding. Yay!
Okay. Right, so it's me again. I don't need to introduce myself because I'm on the slide. So I'm going to apologise first of all for reading because we've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to try and stay in time. But also I'm going to apologise because I did not include a map in my slides, and as you can see, my topic is a history of painting in Vanuatu, which is the project I'm going to talk about now, as well as the research I'm doing on landscape sketches, quite a different topic. I'm aware that probably quite a few people in this audience don't know where Vanuatu is. So Vanuatu is in Oceania. It's in a region known as Melanesia, which is south and east of Papua New Guinea. It's a Y-shaped archipelago bordered by New Caledonia, the Solomon Islands and Fiji. So just to give you a bit of geographical situation there. So it's broadly speaking true, I think everyone would agree, that the material culture of Vanuatu does not really have a high profile in European public consciousness. I recently went to a Pacific History conference this week where I heard some really amazing speakers, and just to take a phrase from one of them, whose name is Damon Salesa, who's head of Pacific Studies at the University of Auckland, these silences, and by silences I mean the fact that we don't know much about Vanuatu, appear as a result of genealogies of privilege and inequality. But in one very important way, Vanuatu is represented here in Cambridge by the objects that we have in the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. These objects are the result of years of collecting and colonialism in Oceania. This region is becoming more prominent in the public consciousness, with several high-profile displays and exhibitions, mostly this year and over the coming couple of years, at the Royal Academy, the British Museum and the National Maritime Museum. They're really brilliant if anyone hasn't been to see them yet, to mark the 250th anniversary of the beginning of Captain Cook's voyage on the Endeavour. This is also the year that I started this project on a history of painting in Vanuatu. At the Hamilton Carr Institute, where I work, we tend to work more on European painting from the medieval period and up to normally the 19th century. So my proposal to focus on this, which is a proposal for a PhD project, on the technical analysis of non-Western indigenous objects is quite a departure. So this is a ramp from the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. It is originally from Malakula, which is one of Vanuatu's larger islands. It is an effigy incorporating various different materials, including a human skull, plant fibre, vegetable paste, clay, wood, spiderweb, pigments and shell. This Rembrandt was collected in the 1920s, I think the accession number is 1927, during the period of colonial rule in the islands. The object on the previous slide that I just showed you before was a painted mask actually made in the 21st century. And it is an example of contemporary customary or custom art or creation in Vanuatu. I'm showing you examples of painted objects from across different time periods because I want my research to be firmly situated within a historical framework, but based on the objects from the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. So as part of this project, I'm intending to identify materials used in painted objects, and in this group I'm including dyes, so dyes used to dye textiles, for example, and I also want to talk about this in terms of the same materials being used for body paint and for tattooing. And I want to analyse the methods of creation as witnessed by the objects, so by doing technical analysis. I want this information to be the starting point of my research, which will investigate the impacts and changing social and political factors on the use of materials in Vanuatu from the pre-contact era all the way to the contemporary art scene. One example from this object, very quickly, so I have at the moment a sample of blue paint from the Ramp, and at the moment we think that this blue might be an example of Reckitt's blue or laundry blue, so I don't know if anyone is familiar with that material, but the presence of this pigment in Oceania and in Vanuatu is the result of colonial period imports. The material itself is an artificial ultramarine mixed with some surfactant, produced and shipped in small cakes, and were designed to be added to water to help wash white textiles, clothing and bed linen and things like that. You can still buy it now. The artist's pigment, ultramarine, was made its way to the indigenous people of Oceania through white European settlers who gave the material to their indigenous servants and used it in artworks. Anyway, that's an example of the type of thing I'm going to look at. Thank you very much. If anyone has any interest in oceanic art, please come and talk to me afterwards.
Well, hello. So I'm Lucy Wrapson. I'm also based at Hamilton Point Street. I'm a senior conservator there, and I'm interested in the technical study of medieval art. So Italian panel painting of the 13th and 14th century, they're typically tempera paintings on a gold background of water gilding. I'm showing some here. And this water gilding was burnished, and by way of surface contrast, it was sometimes embellished. In the 13th century, the one you can see on the left there, this was often undertaken using simple dot punch tools and a point to make freehand incised lines and patterns. This is the one on the left, is Cimabue, about 1280, National Gallery, London. And these fairly simple techniques of just sort of dots and freehand lines persisted up until the time of Sienese painter and great innovator Simone Martini, who you can see on the right here. He brought in the use of specialist punch tools of increasing elaboration. And punch tools were used from the 6th century, as early as the 6th century, but I'm actually hoping to do some research on the period from the early 14th century perhaps to about the mid-15th. Punch marks, once these punch marks with specialist tools were invented, they rapidly became really popular and they were deployed in increasingly complicated patterns. The use had a late flourish in the early to mid-15th century, and then they ceased to be used. Largely until sort of Gothic revival. No punch tools at all survived the Middle Ages, so we only know them from the impressions left on paintings. And scholarship, there's been two main experts who have studied these so far. There's been Frinter and Skaug. Frinter comes very much in the tradition of Morelli, who was an anatomist who's one of the first people to use photographs of works of art in the 1870s to systematically study and compare them. He saw comparison of details like hands, ears, as indicative of the unconscious hand of the artist, and he began a kind of scientific attribution on that basis. Frinter was in fact a former senior restorer with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and a professor of art history in Albany, and he pioneered the photographic collection of images of punch marks measured and to scale. You can see some of those here. He collected over 16,000 of these and published one volume of his magnum opus in 1998, which was a catalogue of the shapes. He intended a second volume, but that's never been released, and he died in 2015. Now, he was the first person to develop a methodology surrounding the gathering of punch mark information, but it was actually Norwegian conservator Erling Skaug who took the research to the next level, particularly in his understanding of workshop practices. Now, these paintings, they come from larger sort of altarpieces, objects which have often since been split up. So a lot of the questions around punch marks are to do with workshop attribution and practices. Skaug found some fascinating results. He was able to reattribute things, but to give an example, he was able to demonstrate that somebody who's completely unknown, known only from their artworks, had a lifespan, basically worked with one major Florentine artist and then another, and he could show things like this from this work, and he could also show through punch marks the terrible impact of the Black Death in Central Italy from 1348, because that caused the death of many painters and the sale of their tools. So fascinating work done by Skaug. Here are some images courtesy of Anna Don, student at the HKI, and they show you how much easier the photography of punch marks has become since the days of Frinter, who used a state-of-the-art forensics camera in the 50s. Scout too has had to rely on pre-digital photography, a lot of carefully arranged access, capacity to take objects off the wall, put measuring tape on them. So what I would like to do really is to use modern digital methods to do this in a less invasive way, to stop this process of having to take objects off the wall, perhaps use a method such as laser scanning with a 3D laser scan system, or maybe even trying something that's going to be much more, lasers and digital photography, something like this. Disadvantages to using some of the laser scanning techniques come from sort of cost and processing power. So it may be that I'm going to have to develop a lower tech and simpler method using digital photography. Also, I think there's great prospects for doing work with this using post-processing, using image registration and to look at different sets of data and to put them into one coordinate system. Punch marks are really, really tiny, so to the extent that sometimes you have to use tiny anomalous features to distinguish them. And as Scout's work focuses mainly on Florence, I'd really like to work further on some Sienese painting, especially with the careers of Simone Martini and his brother-in-law Lippo Memmi, because there are really interesting questions over his career and where he ended up, because he began life, it seems, in Siena and ended in Avignon. So as well as this angle, I'm interested not just in the appearance of the individual tools, but also in the patterns they build up together, which I think you can also attribute to different artists. And this is something that's been worked on to an extent by Scout, but I think that newer digital classification methods can probably take this further. Thanks very much.
Hello, I'm Spike Bucklow. I'm also from the Hamilton Carr Institute, and I seem to have failed to have written the title on my slide, so I have two titles, which I can't remember, but they're on a piece of paper in front of you. Basically it's another plea for help. It's a plea for help for help about particle sizes. It sounds like a simple problem, it's actually a lot more complicated. A lot of modern industrial processes are continuous versions of medieval batch processes. When you have a batch process, material processing is quite difficult. So what I want to think about is taking a mineral, hitting it, turning it into a powder. That's done in several stages. That's azurite, and there's somebody hitting it with a hammer in a pestle. And you can see a variety of different sizes of particle there. Then you grind it in the pestle with a mortar, and then after that you transfer it to a slab, add water, and grind with a muller. Now the colour that you see there is very similar to the colour of the mineral that I first showed. But unfortunately, the pigment particle size there is too big. It would make very, very gritty pigment, very gritty paint. So you continue to grind it, and unfortunately, it loses its colour, becomes very insipid, and not very nice. So there's a third process, which is how to separate out the different particle sizes, because it turns out, with this particular mineral, that the colour depends on the particle size. So if it's 1 micron or less, it's colourless, and if it's a number of microns, it's a nice colour. So you do this separation by a differential sedimentation. The big particles fall out of the liquid first, the small particles stay in the suspension, and you pour them off. This is from the website I taught at the History of Design MA course, and they put some stuff on the web. Of course, this is totally fake. It takes about 20 or 30 different decantings to get that kind of colour difference. But we know from looking at paintings that artists were very good at deciding on particular particle sizes, and here they were guided by the colour. And I want to talk about another example where they're not guided by colour. Because if you look at earth pigments, the colour there is due, they're mainly iron oxides, hydroxides with other stuff in them. And the colour relates to the chemistry rather than the particle size. So you've got a lot of iron in a river up there, and here another iron earth pigment in in a pool suspended, and that will settle out. You have no, the colour difference there has nothing to do with particle size, but you still want to be able to control particle sizes. So in this case, you control it by listening to what it sounds like when you grind it. It starts off sounding like fingers scratching on a blackboard, then it ends up with a series of hisses that imperceptibly move into a rather hypnotic song. And what I would like to do is, to anybody who knows about particle sizes, is ask if anybody wants to collaborate on the quantitative assessment of particle sizes and the correlation with colour and sound in recording either the colour or the sound that's being made. And this is part of the job I'm working on with an artist whose name I seem to have put on the previous slide, Anya McCausland. She has gone around 50. Well, we did a number of bits of work, but one of them has been going around coal mines. These are the acid drainage from abandoned coal mines, and at the moment there are thousands of tons of earth pigments that are being used as industrial, well, they are industrial waste, and we're trying to convert them into a cultural artefact. And we've already made some paint. But if anybody can help with particle size determination, I would be very pleased to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, I'm Edward Cheese. I'm book and manuscript conservator at the Fitzwilliam Museum, and I wanted to present to you some work I've been doing on an extraordinary printed book, the Astronomicon Caesareum of Apicianus, printed in 1540 in Ingolstadt at the author's own press. It's a large folio, it's a superb book, it's described as the high point of 16th century printing. Appianus was a court mathematician, astronomer. He was a poet, artist and humorist. There's lots of puns in Latin. I don't speak or read Latin, but apparently there are lots of puns in this thing. He was making this for the Caesars, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and his brother Ferdinand I of Spain. It's notable for its instruments. It's not just a book that you read text that you can digitise by taking flat pictures. It's made up of lots of paper instruments which work inside bovels based on the astrolabe. They allow Appianus to convey lots and lots of information without having to refer to a lot of complex mathematics. That was his main aim, to make astronomy available to people who weren't great mathematicians. It took about 6 to 8 years to produce this book, about 120 copies it's reckoned. It's really an extraordinary thing. Let me just show you. In our copy we have one of the good copies. There are 2 different levels of production, one on sort of fairly good paper with some colouring. Ours has got gilding in it as well. It's on superb quality paper. It's beautiful to work on. Any paper conservator would just love it. And it's got this great watermark which shows it's one of the deluxe copies. Fascinating piece of printing. You can see how decorative the type set out is. Again, trying to spread the pressure across the plate, but it's done very beautifully. We've got mirror image type, exceedingly rare to come across. Why would he do that? Is it just showing off? It's a wonderful thing. We've got paint that when you turn, it's all hand coloured. It's supposed to be coloured at the press. But every copy I've seen photographs of is slightly different, so what's going on there? Lots of questions to ask. But when you turn some leaves, you suddenly get a shimmering gold because some of the paint, the pale pink colours, and you can see it next to the picture of Christ. Hope it picks up. It's got glitter, very, very fine glitter in the paint. It'd be lovely to find out what that is. It's an enormously complex production. Here you can see folio 15 verso, and a large, enlarged piece in the middle shows the impression of uninked type at either head and tail of that little note in the margin. That's bearer type. Again, it's trying to spread the pressure of the printing so that you get a decent impression without the small type going straight through the page from too much pressure. but that seems to me to have been put in after the main printing was done, because that impression goes straight through onto folio 14, which you can see just below. You can only get that by pressing through 2 pages at once. This is a very complex production. Here, here we have one of the amazing tools. These discs are on little silk threads, little paper axles. They all turn around so you can work out amazing things. We have another instrument here. This book is fascinating. What do we do with it now? I could stand here and tell you I've repaired it with Japanese paper and wheat starch paste and you'd all be falling asleep. That's not the point. We've had it digitised. Our photography department has excelled itself with beautiful pictures. We've also had it done at the same time in raking light so you can get the texture of the paper. Our copy hasn't been pressed, therefore we've got the rope marks where the paper was originally hung over its rope to dry. We've got all the impressions, the blind impressions, we've got the texture of the paper. We've got different watermarks in different elements. Some of the Vauvel sections had become detached. Looking at watermarks there, we have watermarks from the less good copy. What was going on with the production? So my question really is, let's collaborate. I'm a conservator. I've fallen in love with this book. I don't read Latin. I have no idea about Ptolemaic astronomy, but it's just captivating. And I think I like to be guided by something that Appianus said of astronomy, what he was writing about. He said it asks to be understood. Well, if anything asks to be understood, it's this book. I want to get it out there. Ours is beautifully preserved because it's been shut up in a library, it's been broken, nobody's been allowed to read it. How do you get it out there? I would like to digitise it, we've done that. I'd like to give it in some sort of digital format where we can bring together all the elements that go into it. The Ptolemaic astronomy, which 3 years later was completely outdated by Copernicus, and Kepler announced that this book in the 17th century was a complete waste of time and ingenuity. Well, I don't think so. I think the story of the science that didn't work is really interesting. So if you've got any thoughts as to what sort of collaborations might be involved, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Helena Rodwell. I work in collections care at the Fitzwilliam Museum. And I'm going to talk to you about an ongoing project. I actually talked about this at the last Sounds of Art Day last year, but the project has moved on and has had some offshoots, so I'll just give a brief overview of that. So this all came about because we were getting a lot of feedback from our front of house staff that people were touching the objects, and at the Fitzwilliam Museum we have a blanket wide do not touch policy. And I think in short I wanted a very easy answer to this, but there isn't one. So I started looking more into it and what kind of research has already been done out there, and I decided to do some observation in the galleries. So I had a wonderful team of volunteers who are still doing it now. So over the past 10 months we've had about 40 volunteers giving about a massive 1,200 hours of their time watching people in the galleries just to see what it is they're doing and how they're interacting with some specific pieces in the collections. And these are some of the bits that are actually under observation. And on the left, Venus, I haven't actually processed the information, but she used to be in the courtyard where the shop and the cafe was, and she attracted a lot of attention. She's a very attractive woman and she's got a nice bum, which you could see, but she's since been moved. She's lost her plinth. She's now in the founder's entrance and you can no longer see her bum. So it'll be interesting to see the contrast between the spaces that these objects are actually displayed in and how that influences the visitor's behaviour. But as part of this project, a couple of other things have actually come about. So one of them is this Think Lab initiative, which is actually it's part of the Arts and Humanities Research Council doctoral training partnership at the University of Cambridge. And the idea is to give PhD students an opportunity to apply their research skills in a real life situation. So they've done it with businesses and organisations. And the museum put forward a question, which was how can we increase tactile access to the collections without compromising our preservation policy. And we had, I think, the most volunteers from the PhDs group for this particular problem. So we posed the problem, and we basically got about 35 hours worth of research from these PhD students over a month, which is fantastic. And then they presented some of their results to us, and they focused on 3 different demographic groups. So the student population, so these are students within the university, so they had great access to that. Non-English speaking visitors, we have a lot of foreign language schools, we have a lot of international tourists at the museum, and how can we communicate more with them about our conservation and our do not touch policy. And then the third group were, I suppose you could categorise it as entitled people, I suppose. That has negative connotations, but that wasn't the intention. So that might be people who have a cultural or religious association with the collections on display, or it might be craftspeople or even conservators or researchers who have in-depth knowledge of the collections. So the students went away and they researched these 3 different demographics and presented some of their results. So some are fairly straightforward, for example, using more pictures rather than text for our non-English speakers. So I'll move on because I'm running out of time, but it was a really good initiative, and it meant that we had loads of research and ideas from people outside of the museum. And then this one is another project. We got some funding from the university, and it was a pump priming award to develop relationships with industry. And Dan Pett, who is here somewhere, who is our head of digital and IT, he's very keen on 3D modelling. And one of the suggestions when I was talking about this problem is a lot of people say, can you have 3D replicas or models to try and satisfy people's desire to touch things? So this is looking at training people on how to 3D model, but also utilising this technology to provide something for visitors to interact with. So I suppose what's... If you've got ideas, let me know.
Okay, hello. My name's Caroline Peach. I'm an independent consultant, but I'm here speaking on behalf of one of my clients today, the National Heritage Science Forum. So NHSF brings together 18 organisations that either produce or use heritage science research, and it was set up to overcome key challenges faced by the heritage science sector, one of which was seen to be fragmentation. The forum's members work together to help bring the sector together and to improve collaboration. So I'm sort of talking from the other side of what we offer, I suppose, in terms of help and support for collaboration. And one of its early initiatives was to purchase a subscription to something called Kit Catalogue. This is an online system for listing and organising kit or equipment. NHSF encourages its 18 members to list their equipment that they use for heritage science research and to make this list visible in what we call public view. And the idea is that people will share access to equipment across the sector, making better use of their resources by minimising duplication in purchasing perhaps, but also perhaps the costs of maintaining equipment. Now the conditions under which different organisations might want to make their kit available can vary. So they might require that you have certain experience or training to be able to use it, for instance. And all of this information is shown on the catalogue itself. The catalogue, I think, another important aspect is that it can be used to identify people who have experience of using different types of equipment. So if you were wanting to use something or other, you could have a look through and find out who else was using that, and perhaps get in touch if you had questions around that. And we try to help people to make it easy to use this database. We've recently put some FAQs onto the website, and you can find that's the address of the catalogue on our own website, Heritage Science Forum, or there's a direct link from within kit catalogue itself, to the NHSF part of it. And our FAQs cover both information for people who might want to list equipment, but also for those who might want to use the catalogue. We've only just put them up, so our plea, I guess, in terms of feedback is if there's anything else that you think would be useful to know, once you've read those, do get in touch with me and we can develop the FAQs. So this is what it looks like. We've also, alongside the catalogue itself, we've developed a checklist of things that people might want to think about when entering into an agreement to borrow or use kit. We've called it an MOU checklist, and you can get it either from the website or from that little link at the top of the catalogue itself that I've circled on that slide. At the moment, the catalogue is best used by looking at the different departments or organisations. I think I picked on British Library here. And you can scroll through the list to see what people have added. But we're also currently working with our members to develop some sort of suitable categories of kit and to make it more searchable on that basis. Again, welcome feedback on what you think would work well to support your use in that way. And these are logos of all the NHSF member organisations. They've not yet all listed their kit, or all of their kit. And some of the challenges I think that they face is that although on the face of it, these are large organisations, in most cases their research departments are small. And in some cases there's a bit of hesitation, I think naturally, about listing kit in case they're overwhelmed with inquiries that they can't meet. But we're encouraging them. Do help us encourage them as well, with the aim of increasing collaboration and basically strengthening our ability to support each other across the sector. And then quickly, very quickly, there are a few other things that are hot off the press that I'd like to mention, so speeding up. First, directly related to Kit Catalogue is a workshop called What Can Heritage Science Do For You?, which is being organised with UCM, and Laura from TNA is also one of our main speakers alongside Paola. This is going to be held at the British Library on the 12th of March. You can book through the UCM website. It's to help people find out what heritage science is going to do for them, so encourage others to look at it too, please. Secondly, we've been working with the sector to develop a strategic framework for heritage science, just launched Wednesday evening, all the information on the website. This is a framework that we hope will be used by the sector. We want to hear about what is going on in terms of heritage science activity in your organisations that links to the goals of research and skills and demonstrating economic and social impact. We've got an online tool. Please add to it and show us where the examples of the work are going on. And then finally, NHSF is changing its own structure to enable larger member organisations so more people can take part in the work that we do and the conversations that we have around heritage science. And we're also changing the fee structure from 2019 to make it more accessible, cheaper, so that hopefully more people can join and be part of the forum. Thank you very much.